Hello, can you guys hear me? Yeah. All right, great. What's going on, everybody? It's your boy, Kilo Loco, and yeah, it's my first time ever being outside of the States, and this is my very first talk, so if it sucks, well, you can't really say anything about that because that's against code of conduct, so it doesn't really matter. All right, so let's just jump into my presentation. So I'm gonna be talking about auditing your app with the Accessibility Inspector. And as you can see here, we have what is accessibility. So I could go through and I could essentially show this talk in this white background with gray text and all that stuff, but that's not going to be essentially very legible, especially for the people in the back, smaller fonts, bad contrast ratio. That's not going to work out for everybody. So in order to be more accessible, to make my talk more accessible to all of you, I decided, well, let's increase that contrast ratio. I'm going to do black background with white text. So now I think that everybody can probably see this a lot better. And this is essentially the concept behind making your apps more accessible, is that even though somebody in the front row might be able to read or be able to see exactly what's going on screen, it wouldn't be fair to the people in the back, right? It wouldn't be fair to all the people that might have vision disabilities or anything like that. And we want to keep everybody in mind. So what is accessibility? Accessibility is essentially just making your app accessible to everyone, and also including people with disabilities. We want to make sure that we're able to reach as many people as possible. We don't want to exclude anybody from our apps. That would be kind of messed up. So why should you care? Well, this is a kind of messed up question to be asking. So if you're asking this, you definitely don't want to be open about asking why should I care about accessibility. I mean, that's just very not, it's not good. You're not being very empathetic. And if you are wondering why should I care about accessibility, if you are more, self-centered, then there are a couple of greedy reasons why you might want to implement accessibility into your app. So more users, and more users usually means, more money. So getting paid, I think everybody could get behind getting paid. I mean, who doesn't want to get paid? So the other thing is only accessible apps will be considered for Apple's Design Choice Awards. So if you have this dream of getting your app showcased by Apple and getting 1 million downloads just because they gave you this award and you're featured on the App Store, well, guess what? Accessibility is one of the things that they check for, and if your app is not accessible, you're not going to make it. So those are the greedy reasons. Now, how I came across accessibility. I actually didn't really know too much about accessibility, from the start, and I'm sure that a lot of people actually don't. I'm a self-taught developer, and a lot of the concepts that I learn, I come across by myself, or I make a YouTube video and then somebody asks if I could cover a different topic, and that's how I come across a lot of these things. So the way that I actually came across accessibility was by accident. I wasn't told about it by anybody. I kind of had an idea that it was out there, but I didn't really take the time to look into it. And because of that, it took a long time before I actually got into it. So the first time that I actually started working with accessibility was towards the beginning of this year. And I found it mainly because I was scrolling through the drop-down that Xcode provides for you when you're looking for maybe like a feature of a specific element, and you're going through like maybe a UI view and you're trying to look for a specific property or a method or something like that, and you can't find it, so you keep scrolling, you scroll, and you get this giant block where you're like, oh, I couldn't find the feature because now it's just all this accessibility and everything is just prefixed with the word accessibility. And I'm like, this is so annoying. Like I have to scroll through all of them because there's like 100 different accessibility properties and methods that are available. And I kind of just saw it as being annoying. It was getting in my way of what I was trying to get to. So one day I actually, stopped to think, okay, what is all this? What is all this stuff that I'm scrolling through? And then I realized, okay, it's accessibility, and what does that really mean? And I started looking into it. And that's when I was kind of like, wow, I was kind of taken back. I was, hey, accessibility, look at all the different things that you can do with it, And Apple just makes it so much easier to get started with accessibility, and you have all these different properties and methods available to you. So that's when I really started getting curious. So I started looking into it, and I created a YouTube video just doing some of the basics. This was one of the very first things that I learned. It was working with voiceover doing voiceover and working with the accessibility labels that are available on all UI view subclasses. So if you have any type of view, you can essentially set the label, the accessibility label for that element, and you can essentially tell VoiceOver what you want the user to hear when Siri's reading it back to them. So I thought that was really cool. And then Dub hits just last month, and man, it was mind blowing. I mean, it's very clear that everybody got their minds blown with all the different things that were released. We had, Swift UI, that was huge. That was awesome. You get things like Combine and all the different upgrades to all the different applications and the APIs. But the one thing that stood out to me the most was the voice control. When they started doing the voice control video, where you have somebody that didn't even have full access over their own body, but they had access over the apps that they were interacting with, I thought that was amazing. And they were able to do it by essentially setting down numbers on the device. So they can just specify what number that they're looking to use, and they were able to still interact with the device. And that was amazing. So then I revisited my friend, this guy. So who has seen this specific logo on their laptop or on their machine? Okay, so that's kind of sad because it was like about maybe 25 to 33% people have actually seen this logo. And I'm not talking about the naked person that wants to give you a hug. I'm talking about the one that's magnified on the naked person wanting to give you a hug, right? So this is actually the app icon for the accessibility inspector. And this actually comes with Xcode. So anybody that has Xcode on their machine, you already have this on your machine. So you can actually do a spotlight search, and you can bring it up, and it's already on there. Accessibility is just one of those things that's kind of baked in with Apple. Apple keeps pushing forward and keeps providing us with all these different awesome tools so that we can make our apps more accessible to everybody. So when you open up the accessibility inspector, it looks something like this. It's relatively simple. Not too much going on. It's not like you opened up Photoshop and there's a million things all over the place, right? It's just very simple and straightforward. And there's not too much to it because accessibility is just very simple to implement. It's not overly complex rocket science type topic. And out of the box, if you're using regular UI elements, anything that's subclassed from UI view, a lot of this stuff is already by default accessible, and your app is actually probably a lot more accessible than you might even think that it is, just by default. As long as you're using, things like UI buttons, UI table views, all these things are automatically, accessibility friendly. Now there are rooms for improvement, but a lot of this stuff is actually already working. So, next time that you're scrolling through and you see this block of all these prefixed properties and methods that say accessibility, that just goes to show you how much more you can do with accessibility, how much better your app can be using all these different accessibility features. So moving forward, even Swift UI is going to be even more accessible than UIKit. So that's one of the awesome things, is that the accessibility inspector is not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere at all. Whether you're using it for UI Kit, whether you're using it with Swift UI, it's going to be a great tool that you should have, that you should be using all the time. It's relevant for websites. It's relevant for apps, for your Mac applications. When you want to start, doing cross-platform, it's going to be relevant for all of these things. So, how accessible is your app? And the only real way to figure out this is to actually just go ahead and try it. So you're gonna actually have to open up the accessibility inspector. You have to go to your friend, the naked little guy that's giving you a hug, and he's gonna give you some love. He's ready to show you how to make your app more accessible. So open up the accessibility inspector and you get something that looks like this. Once again, very simple, very straightforward. And if you take a look at it up here at the top, it's separated into a couple of different elements, right? At the top left, you're gonna have the target. So essentially this is just like how you would have what target you want to specify, if you wanted to do it on the simulator or if you wanted to do it on a real device, this is where you would select that type of thing. If you want to select a specific element on the screen, whether, once again, a simulator or on the device, this is what the little crosshairs is for. And you could choose what you want to shoot down. And then we have the sections. So this is kind of like a sections tab. And we have 3 elements in here. We have the inspection, which is on the left, the audit, which is a really cool feature, and we're gonna actually be using that a lot in today's talk. And then we have the settings. Now, down here, I also wanted to mention that in Xcode Beta 11, you'll actually have another feature that's included with this, which is actually voiceover. You'll actually be able to hear Siri say the things that will be said to the user. So this is a newer feature, but I'm not going to be talking about this in this talk because I don't want anybody to have any excuses. If you're like, oh, well, I need the voiceover or whatever, I don't want to hear the excuses. I just want you to go out here and start using the accessibility inspector because it's a great tool and you should be using it starting today. There's no reason that you're not using it after today. Everybody knows about it now. You should be using it. But let's go back over here to the top, and we're gonna actually start off with going into the auditor, or to audit our app. So when you switch over to auditing your app, this is kind of the screen that it looks like. Once again, keeping it very simple, and you start off with no warnings. Now, all you have to do is select which target you want to use. So if you're gonna be using your device or a simulator, in this case, I'm using the simulator. So I bring up my app, and this is what it's gonna look like, right? Very simple app, a list that we've all built, I'm sure, before, right? And what we're gonna do is if we were to go ahead and run this audit, we're gonna get a lot of stuff coming back. Now, this might look a little bit intimidating at first, but it's actually not that bad. Take a look at what we're actually dealing with, and a lot of the stuff is just repeated. Now, you might correctly have assumed that we're getting a lot of repeated warnings because we're working with a list, and a lot of these things are just simply because the table view cells are implementing the same incorrect accessibility feature, so it's essentially repeating that warning. So if we were to go ahead and select this specific line item, where it says hit area is too small, you'll actually see a small description of what's going on. So it says the size of the element is too small for user to interact. Current size is 25 by 25, right? So it looks good to me UI-wise, but accessibility-wise, this isn't something that's easy to hit for everybody. It's just too small of an icon. It's too small of a hit area for somebody to tap. I don't know how many people have ever had the problem with fat fingers, but this is kind of like having fat fingers. So if you wanted to see exactly which element it was referring to, then we have this little eye icon, and this will actually show you a preview. It'll bring up a preview, the preview app, and it will put a box around what it's actually specifically referring to. So there's no question about what is exactly going on here? What element is it referring to? It shows you, very simple, very straightforward. Now, let's say I didn't understand what the description was. Well, if we go over to the question mark over here, you'll actually see that there's a fix suggestion. So this is going to give you an even more readable description of how to fix this problem. Now, I really wish that they had something this descriptive in Xcode, but they don't. This is as easy as it gets. It's not going to get any easier than that. They really want you to start using accessibility. So what we would have to do is, for this specific case, we would need to change our constraints from 25 to 44, right? And whether you're doing this in interface builder storyboards, or if you're doing it in code, and I did both of them because, you know, that's accessible for everybody, right? So what we would have to do is we just change this to 44 by 44 if you were doing like manual like set constraints just like this. So if we were to change this everything to 44, then what's going to happen is those warnings are going to go away. So then once we do that, we just head back over to the accessibility inspector, or we go to the audit section of the accessibility inspector, and those errors go away. So now we still have a couple more to go. But as you can see, the bottom, it's not all the way filled up to the bottom. So we're making some progress. It's looking good. I'm liking it. Things are getting better. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention is that down here we have actually a preview. So you don't actually have to hit the eye icon of that row item. If you just go ahead and select that item, it will show you at the very bottom of what type of element it's referring to. Now, if you have a lot of the same elements on the screen, you might not know exactly which one it is, but most likely you're gonna have something like this where they're all essentially in like cells or something like that, they're repeated. So since it's not unique, you'll probably be able to tell in general, all of these are having the same problem. So if we go ahead and take a look at what the fix suggestion is for this specific problem, it says set a human readable localized accessibility label. I mean, like I said, it doesn't get more straightforward than that. It's telling you what to do. But if this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, then what you can do is you can go back over to the inspection area. And what you can do is you can go ahead and use the sniper icon or the crosshair icon. And you can click on the element that we saw in the preview at the very bottom of the screen, and we can figure out, hey, what is it, what is going on? So remember that it said that the accessibility label, there was something wrong with it. So we go ahead, we snipe the bird, and we can see that it highlights it in green. And we can actually see right here in the quick look and in the label area, the quick look is gonna tell you what VoiceOver is gonna read to the user. So it's gonna read bird icon button. Now, most people aren't gonna understand what bird icon, what that action is, right? You know, you might be able to recognize the the Twitter logo, but you wouldn't be able to understand what bird icon is if you couldn't see this, right? And then also you could just see that the accessibility label is set to bird icon. So what we need to do is we need to change this. And it's just as simple as one line, right? One line. You select the element, you set the accessibility label, you set it to whatever it needs to be. In this case, I'm gonna call it tweet. And we don't wanna say tweet button because as you saw, since it is a UI button, it's gonna already include that verbiage in the readback. So we just set it to tweet and it's gonna be set to tweet button. Bam, another one taken out. We're looking good, we're making progress, I like it. So now, next what we have is we have dynamic text, and it's saying that, essentially it's saying that our font isn't scaling the way that it's supposed to be. So if somebody has large font, it's not growing with it. We're ignoring the user's settings and we're just saying, I don't care about you. I'm just gonna present the UI the way that the designer told me to do it, and nobody cares about you. And that's kind of rude, so don't do that. Now, a little bit towards the bottom, we have a couple of different, a different warning, but it's essentially the same thing. It's just saying, you know, it's partially unsupported. I don't know how one is partially unsupported and the other is unsupported completely, but I mean, still better than Xcode. But it's essentially the same thing. So we're going to be attacking this two birds, one stone right now. So if we go over to the settings, we can actually see how to, you know, figure out what's going on, like what is it really talking about. So we head over to the settings, and we have this, this slider at the bottom for the font size. Now, if we go ahead and change this slider, you can actually see I'm changing it to different font sizes, and nothing's really happening, right? So what we need to do, whoa, overshot. What we need to do is we need to do a couple of things. Well, only 2 things really per element. And what we need to do is, whether you're doing it in, once again, interface builder or in code, your code or your project would essentially look something like this. So you would have either the font set in interface builder, or you're setting it right there in code, right? And what we need to do is we need to essentially change this, and we need to go to the font, and we need to choose a different text style. So if you were to use Interface Builder, you would actually see when you're setting the font, it would give you a drop down. Now you might choose custom, you might choose system, but at the very bottom is a list of the different text styles that you can use. And this is what we really want to use, are the different text styles. So if you want to learn a little bit more about text styles, you can Google this and look it up, but it's just essentially showing you how each of these text styles kind of map. Now, it's not important to memorize this type of thing. We're developers, we forget everything, and we Google the simplest things, how to create a button, right? So just look it up. But you can find out how each of these text styles map. And if we're doing it on Interface Builder, then we just go ahead and we set it to whatever type of font that we want, right? So in this case, at the top, I'm setting the name label to a headline text style, and I need to also make sure that I'm checking the automatically adjust font. So that's very important. If you don't do the check mark for automatically adjust font, it's not going to work. Now, if we wanted to do it in code, we're doing exactly the same exact thing. Instead of using system font, we're using preferred font for text style, and we're passing in enum for what type of text style that we want to use. It might be a struct, I'm not sure. But we're passing in something that we want to specify, hey, we want it to look like this. And then we're also going to essentially change that flag. Instead of a check mark, we have to set adjust font for content size category is equal to true. Now, the one bad thing about accessibility, you get these really long names, and they're not very sexy in your code, but it is what it is. So if you wanted to use a custom font, then what you would do is you would have to do this in code. You can't really do this in Interface Builder from my understanding. And what you would need to do is you would need to access your font, and then you would need to create a UI font metric. So a UI font metric is going to essentially allow you to specify what type of text style you want to use. And then from that metric, you can use a method on it called scaled font for, and then you pass in whatever your font is. So this is how you would use dynamic custom fonts. And then you can get all the same benefits of allowing your text to scale and grow based off of the user's settings. So now if we go ahead and look at this, if we were to try to grow our text, and as we change the slider, we can actually see it growing. So it grows, that's pretty good, but this kind of sucks, right? It's not sexy anymore. So we need to change that. So what we need to do is we need to implement this method that's available on all UI view subclasses, which is trait collection did change. Now, all your UI view subclasses have a property called trait collection, and what that's going to do is it's essentially going to hold some information about your environment, about the users, essentially their environment. And what we need to do is, since I'm using stack views in this particular case, I'm using stack views to hold all my content. I hope you guys are using stack views. It makes everything a lot easier. But since I'm using stack views, it's as simple as just writing these 2 lines. So I essentially just create a flag, is large text on, and then we have a trait collection that has a property on it called preferred content size category, and then it has a property on that's called is accessibility category. So it's pretty much saying, is this super large font, or is this just kind of regularly large font, or just regular font in general? And then based off of that, we're just going to use a ternary operator to find out, okay, how should I be structuring my view? Should it be laid out vertically? Should it be laid out horizontally? And when we set that, we can see the differences in our UI. So now, based off of whatever the user has set their settings to, we can kind of figure out what the UI should look like. And it really makes for a great dynamic UI. Now, your layout might be a little bit more complex, but this is essentially where you can start. This is a great place to start, is just, changing maybe the stack view that's holding your content to vertical, and then a lot of things really start working already. So when we run the audit finally, bam, clear, love it. Nice and clean, everything's sexy, we're loving it. So it's time to celebrate. It's time to celebrate. You guys did something great, and it's time to crack a cold one and just, throw it back, be happy. Enjoy that fact. You made your app that much more accessible. You're going to reach more users, make more money because you're selfish. And it's a win-win for all, right? So that's just auditing, right? This is one feature on the Accessibility Inspector. I know that we touched on a couple of them, but this is just me kind of diving into the Accessibility Inspector, the auditing feature. Now there's other things that you can try out. There's inverting colors. There's, you can check the contrast of the text that you're using. And there's a lot of great things about the Accessibility Inspector. And I highly encourage you guys to go, or you all, I'm sorry. I highly encourage you all to go out and use it and just play with it. Just try it on one of your screens, just try it. So there's so much that can be done with it, and it's a really great tool. And what I really hope to accomplish after the end of this talk is that you put it in your doc. If you just put it in your doc, if you just see it, you might open it, one day when you're bored. If you just put it in if you're exposed to it, I'm hoping that you'll see it and you'll use it at least once, right? I'm also hoping that you audit at least one screen at least once. Just open up your app, see how bad is it? How bad is your app? And I think you'll be surprised that it's actually not as bad as you think it is. It's, as you saw, these are one-liners, two-liners, and it's fixing things. And then also, use it when you're not feeling productive. We all have those days when we're just not feeling like writing code. We're not feeling super productive, and we're just like, meh. And we're not coding passionately anymore, right? So what I found is that the Accessibility Inspector makes for great little wins, because you can see how easy it is to fix some of these problems. And when you start building these little wins, it kind of gets you some momentum to get you into that coding mindset, because now you've accomplished something, you can feel good about something, you're celebrating, right? And you're building that momentum, and now you can go knock out whatever feature it is that you were supposed to be working on anyways. So that's pretty much it. If you want to reach out to me, once again, name is Kilo Loco or Kyle Lee. It doesn't matter. Call me whatever you want. You can just say, hey, and I'll be like, oh, okay. And then my website is kiloloco.com. You can also catch my videos on YouTube, youtube.com/kiloloco. And then on social media, it's at @kilo_loco. So that's all for me today. Go out there, keep coding passionately.